Check, 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 check.
Can you hear me?
Huh. I heard somebody.
Monte?
Yes.
Are you? Hi, I'm Linda.
Hi, Linda. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Although I'm definitely backlit. Let me see if I can figure out a better. I have a faculty office now, but it's kind of a dark little hole.
Hi.
Hi, Linda. Hi,
Oh, there
Monte.
we go. Hi. How are you doing, Suzanne?
I'm good. Bit
Great.
tired,
I'm
but
happy that this is working.
yeah, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you
no,
both
good.
so much for coming.
Oh, thank you for
So nice
setting
to
this up.
see
I'm thrilled about it.
Yeah, so nice to finally meet you, Suzanne.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. I'm gonna
And
sit
is that Margaret there? Is that Margaret there?
I'm just realizing I should turn my phone on to do not disturb. There we go. Yes, hi, good to meet you guys.
Hi. Linda, hi.
Hi.
And hi, Margaret. I'm Monte.
Hi, Monty. Great to meet you.
last year. I had the biggest one.
It's just so hard to do any like actual in-depth discussion of that number. Yeah. 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 I know.
Monty,
Yes.
Monty, I can't wait to see your work. You know, hanging.
Yeah, the sketchbooks are going to be hard for you to look through because they're physically there. But but you're going to be going to the exhibition at some point.
Yeah, I will. Yeah,
Oh,
during
good,
the
good.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid I won't be able to. So I'm hoping Suzanne's going to send me some good photos of everybody's work to check out.
Well, I'm a photographer. I can send some too if I do go.
Yeah, great. I'll circle back to you if I don't feel like I'm getting shown enough.
No, you'll get plenty, I'm sure.
Good, good.
I don't think it's. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of like.
No, I'm curious to see how it goes with the sketchbooks, and I built those kind of trays that they are fastened into, but the students and whoever at the gallery will be able to look through all three sketchbooks. So that's it makes me slightly nervous, but I let people handle the sketchbooks all the time. It's just usually I'm there while they're doing it.
Right, right. Well, I hope you're going to talk about how you came to be interested in this subject matter. I'll be interested to hear about that because there aren't that many artists that, you know, have our sort of interest in this subject matter.
Sensibility. Yeah, but we do gravitate to each other. I feel like I know a ton of people who that's their kind of subject
it's
matter.
True. Right. Even a lot of other photographers too. But I think what's nice about this show is that it's a mixed media.
Yeah, I think seeing it in different formats is definitely I really do wish I could be there and see all of it and how it is in person.
How it works together. Yeah.
Boy.
So you're in Indiana?
Yeah, I'm at Ball State University in Muncie, which is just northeast of Indianapolis a bit. It's actually, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's good. I've heard of Ball State.
It's actually where I went to school back in the 1980s for architecture. And then I just moved back here last year from New York and kind of fell into a job teaching architecture again at my alma mater. And
oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah, last year was great. I taught as a part-time adjunct, and this year they had somebody fall through at the last minute, so I became full-time, like a full-time contract prof, which is really has great great benefits for one thing, but just I haven't had a steady job in a couple of decades. I was a freelancer for a long time in New York, and
wow, so this
it's a nice change.
Yeah. That's great.
Like, I figured I have some that we can actually just pass, like, because they're sketches that don't really, yeah. Oh, right, I was gonna do that, yeah. I'll grab one of the little ones.
Should I leave this off so they can see those? Yeah.
Well, I'm in New York City,
Oh yeah, whereabouts in the city are you?
Upper East Side.
Mhm.
96 and Lex.
I lived the
It's
last 13 years I was in Greenpoint for the last 13 years, Long Island City for a few years before that, and Lower East Side and Chinatown when I first moved to New York.
Yeah, I like it up here. It's very convenient.
Mhm.
Two good subway systems,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
I can get anywhere, you know.
Oh yeah, you're just making me feel bad because there is zero public transit where I live now. So everybody drives everywhere. That's
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hadn't had a car for a long time in New York, but now I get to learn about that again.
Do you come back at all, or?
Yeah, I was just back there a few weeks ago. It's the first time I'd been back since I moved, but I feel like it'll probably be something I do every summer. My daughter is in college in Europe, but she's born and raised New York, so she comes back there in the summer, and it's a good excuse for me to go back and see friends, to also go back and see her.
I left them-
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I think
Well, and you can fit it all in, you know, whatever it is you want to do, fit it in a short time, you know. You
Yeah,
can
and
pack
it's pretty much a 2 hour flight from Indianapolis to LaGuardia. And so
Uh-huh.
that part's easy. It's not that much money. And I have enough friends there that I pretty much have a place to crash for free until
Good.
until I burn through all my old friends, I suppose.
I can totally.
You have a couch?
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Christos. It's good to see you. Thank you so much to everybody who decided just to spend your time here with us this evening. And thank you to all three artists for finding ways to be here. I'm going to start by reading biographies of the artists so you know who's who and a little bit about their background. I'm going to start with Monte Antrim, who is there. Thank you, Monte. And he is calling in from Indiana. Where in Indiana are you?
Muncie, Indiana, at
That's
Ball
what I
State
thought.
University College of Architecture and Planning, where I teach.
Excellent. And in fact, Monte was born in 1968 and grew up on a farm in Indiana. After earning an undergraduate degree in architecture, he moved to Seattle in 1990 and worked as an architectural designer. In 1998, he moved to New York City and lived there until 2023, working in architecture and design visualization and picking up a master's degree at some point. He now lives in Indiana and is a professor of architecture at Ball State University. And he's very humble, leaving out.
You also made me younger by 2 years. I was born in 1966, but that's okay.
Did I say 68?
Yeah.
I
That's
guess
all right.
you
I'll
just-
take it.
I guess you just look young.
Oh, I act young also, so I think that's part of it.
Linda, before I introduce you, I want to be sure of how you pronounce your last name. Can you tell me?
It's Kuehne.
Kuehne. Okay.
The U is silent and the E is long. Yep.
Okay.
Kuehne.
I actually Googled it and I just got the German pronunciation. I figured that probably was a little.
Right.
Okay, so Linda Kuehne is a contemporary American photographer. Her work explores the cultural implications of the human impact on the landscape in suburbs and cities across the United States. She mixes realistic depiction with abstraction as a means to convey her vision in an instinctive, emotional, and poetic way. She is oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading your biography. Oh, this is your biography. Okay, I'm sorry. Your biography and your statement are nicely mixed together.
Right.
She's interested in the role that the natural landscape and the built environment play in conveying the spirit of a place and the health of a community. She received a BA from Sarah Lawrence College, starting out with a dark room in her basement after college and printing silver gelatin prints. She now works digitally. Her work has been exhibited in galleries and museums, including a two-person show at the Katona Museum of Art, the Samuel Dorsky Museum of Art, a solo show at Kane University, AIR Gallery in Brooklyn, and most recently, a two-person exhibit at the Flynn Gallery in Greenwich, Connecticut. She lives and works in New York. And Margaret Noel, who is here in the flesh next to me, after studying studio art and anthropology at Oberlin College, Margaret Noel spent several years in Austin, Texas, working at a bronze foundry, restoring antique furniture, and interning in paper conservation at UT's Harry Ransom Center. Noel earned her MFA in painting from the New York Studio School and currently splits her time between a studio in the Gowanus area of Brooklyn, New York, and a position as the department chair and professor of drawing and painting in the Department of Art and Design of Kutztown University of Pennsylvania. Her work has been widely exhibited in galleries and museums and art fairs in New York City, Budapest, San Francisco, Houston, and Seattle, among others. It has also been featured in print and online publications, including Hyperallergic, the Hopkins Review, the Painter's Table. She is represented by Marlowe Gallery in Brooklyn. So thank you all three for agreeing to participate in the talk and in the exhibition. It's interesting to me, the response that I've gotten to the shows already. Today is really the first day that the doors have been open. Excuse me. There's been so much interest in the work, and of course, it's wonderful work. Why wouldn't there be? But considering the imagery, which depicts these landscapes, or we'll just call them landscapes, that one could say that they're fairly desolate. It's kind of surprising how much enthusiasm there's been for, I just love these. And I haven't really been able to ask people yet, like, what is it exactly that you're responding to? I don't know, maybe it's some of the scenes look kind of familiar. They're things that, certainly I think all of us have seen living in New Jersey, these suburban landscapes. But it's still an interesting phenomenon to me. I don't know, maybe people really love looking at photographs or realistic scenes, but just considering the content and the imagery of the work, I was really struck by the enthusiasm, which I'm really very happy about. So, and also I'll just say that this show perhaps was one of, or shows, I should say, two shows, were perhaps the most difficult for me to put together as a curator. And I mean, part of it was kind of figuring out who was going to show in the show, who I was going to pair. And then there was this idea that it was going to be one show, because the themes are really, really similar. And yet I felt like they weren't close enough that I felt like I could mix all the work up in one show and have it make sense. But just the theme, while in the front room, there's this, these images reference more man-made desolation, and degradation of the landscape and architecture in the landscape. In the backspace, it's more, well, actually, I was just reading your statement today, and you talk both about, Margaret, about natural disaster and man-made.
And I think I'm also interested in the intersection of those two, how the influence of what we're doing actually is like exacerbating climate, like climate events and all of that. So, yeah.
I want you to ask questions, but can you hold them till the end? Thank you. Yeah, but keep a note. So I don't know, maybe you can start, Margaret, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about them as being desolate landscapes, because I agree, like there is a sense of desolation and isolation in all of the landscapes. For me, they feel like they're sort of both hopeful and, desolate. For me, a lot of mine are about the act of rebuilding after a man-made or climate or natural disaster. And there's a lot of hope in that. One of the things I said in my artist statement is that it also sometimes seems somewhat futile to rebuild in some of these areas where there are repeated, like seismic events or, climate events. So I'm very interested in that. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Should I
You're
say?
doing great. The sound is good. Don't worry, Margaret.
Okay.
You're very audible,
Sorry,
at
I
least
forgot
on
that I was
YouTube.
supposed
Need
to
to
use
start from the beginning again.
Did everyone get all that? I tend to project my voice pretty loudly, but yeah, so I think both it being something that feels both hopeless and hopeful.
Yeah, and I think being in New Jersey, we all have heard about, these situations where buildings come down due to natural disasters and then people rebuilding in the same place again. And I think that what you're saying about hopeful and kind of, I don't know, I don't really want to say hopeless, but whatever the opposite of that is, I can feel that in the work. What was I going to say? It was something about, what did you say again?
I mean, for me, there's like definitely a beauty in that human instinct to like preserve
Yes,
and
thank
rebuild, and so I'm interested in capturing that, even when it does also feel like, why are you rebuilding here? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Now I've lost my train of thought again. There's something very slippery about this idea. Oh, I know that I think that that's one of the things that tied that work to the work in the front for me is the kind of the futility of rebuilding, like this kind of human instinct to just kind of like hunker down and like double down on what you're doing rather than kind of trying to figure out what's a way forward. But just this, I guess it's maybe the refusal to let go,
Well, and not everybody has the option to move someplace else. So I
Yeah.
think that that's part of it as well, like that sometimes you're tied to a place through emotion and sometimes you're tied to a place through finance. And, like you don't always have the ability to pick up and leave. So that's part of the rebuilding as well.
And I was reading something today about just that and how kind of the devolution of the suburbs has a lot to do with the kind of cycling through, building and then not being enough money to support infrastructure or whatever, crumbling infrastructure, and then people just moving away, but that there's, a certain element of the population that can't afford to move away. And they're the ones that end up having to kind of, live in the context of, this crumbling infrastructure that was left.
Right. Well, and there's such trust on a day-to-day basis that like what's been built around us is something that we use as shelter and that we can trust that it will stay there. I mean, you kind of have to have that sense of like
I believe that this building is going to stay standing, or this
Right.
bridge is going to not collapse. You know,
Right.
like, so, yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about that in reference to IKEA furniture and
Ah.
this sort of belief that it's actually going to stand when,
It looks like furniture.
right? So, I guess maybe I can kind of open it up, Monte, to you. Maybe we can start with you. I noticed in your artist statement, you don't really talk about the content of your work. You talk more about the process of making work. And I think it's also really interesting because you're the architect here. And, you know, there's all this work that's about architecture. And yet,
Yeah.
you know, and in your work, you know, it's architecture. It's also just kind of industrial architecture. And there's a lot of cars in your work, but it's very much about the built environment. So I don't know, is there anything about the subject matter that you can share?
I think that I would say that the subject matter is really driven by the process, because both the the paintings as well as the sketchbooks, everything comes from the sketchbook, and that's been a central part of my thinking since I became an architecture student at age 17, way back when. It was pre-digital times. And at that point, I came into college. I had done some drawing, throughout childhood, but not focused on it. And coming into architecture school, it was clear that the way back then that you communicated your ideas was through drawing, and I really wanted to succeed. So I just figured I will I will develop my drawing skills as hard as I can. So I just started carrying a sketchbook all the time, just constantly. And I really just never stopped. So the work in this show is all from the last few years of my time in New York, basically. And what I do, and I think it's interesting that, yes, I don't speak in the statement about the content and the architectural content. And I think that is kind of telling. For me, that's always a given. It's the world I perceive. I think about the built environment, and I don't even think about the fact that that's what I think about. But all of that work happens just wherever I go. And the reason I would say that the desolate industrial landscapes happen is that what I liked to do when I lived in New York was roam around Newtown Creek and wherever I went, Newtown Creek, Broadway Junction, just kind of the little bit more underserved and decrepit parts of the city. Those were places I would go, especially once the pandemic hit. I would take bike rides because there wasn't a lot else you could do. And I just got in the habit of taking long bike rides and drawing. And in the course of that, enough drawings suggested to me, I want to do more with that. And I've always done that. I make silkscreen designs out of things from the sketchbook. I build them up into larger, more finished drawings. And as much as I paint, which isn't very much, I like to paint. I don't like to make up a subject to paint. I like to let it come naturally out of things that I've already recorded in the sketchbook. And they have a tendency to just kind of gravitate to specific types of subject matter. And I will say the automobiles became a thing for me. I grew up around car culture, but I wasn't all that into it. But I had been drawing buildings for so long, and not all buildings are made of straight lines, but that tends to be the predominant language. And I found that when I saw cars of a certain age, I enjoyed drawing those because the lines are just as deliberate as the design of the built landscape, but they tend to be very particular curves and volumetric forms. And I just found it was a great workout. And if you knew, like, if you got a line wrong, it was obvious. And so it became a good iterative process in drawing to really focus on sitting down and in about 20 minutes, just getting the lines of one of these pieces of automotive sculpture, just to get the lines of it correct. And then I would also try to splash in a little bit of the paint, the patina, and increasingly I started working on the surroundings that those cars were in, because I got interested in them as remnants of a past. I think that started when I lived in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, which when I first started hanging around there was still very much an artist's neighborhood. You know, there were still a lot of cheap places to live, and artists tended to have ratty old cars that they drove around in. So that idea of registering the cars, and I always note where they were, that was always as much a part of the sketch recording as what the car itself was. But to increasingly get into its context, the cars to me indicated something about the location that it was in, whether that's the neighborhood or, you know, some site that it had been abandoned on or whatever.
Thank you for that. I actually have some questions that I want to ask you, or things that I want to say about the sketchbooks in particular. But Linda, I want to give you a chance to talk while we're still kind of young into this.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And when I looked at the other artists that you had invited, I was very pleased to accept, and felt I was in really terrific company. Interestingly, I got into photographing abandoned, empty spaces, well, for a couple of reasons. The first one, though, was there's a Carvel somewhere in the room there. And I was passing by in a suburb in Westchester County, and it just struck me, the geometric shapes, the color. I wasn't interested in it because it was abandoned or closed up, but the actual architecture, I mean, it's you know, like a 50s, 60s architecture, but then all the angles, the color, that's what interested me. And interestingly, after I took that photograph, it was in a show, and it got such a good response. And I didn't really expect it, but there was a nostalgia that people had when they were kids, and they, you know, went to Carvel's, and then, of course, along with, you know, the landscape. And I thought, wow, maybe this is an interesting subject matter. But it was really the formal elements. It wasn't because it was closed or abandoned. But from that, I started taking photographs of abandoned buildings because, again, of the formal elements. And I really got into it. And then really read a lot about the impact that these, as Margaret was saying, the impact that these have on a community and their sense of place and the spirit of a place, and what are the implications of that. And then I would say that there's not much sense of renewal in mind, but there are a couple of these photographs. In fact, one that's right behind you in the middle there, that was taken in Arizona, and that was empty for years and has finally been occupied by a business. And I've always wanted to do a series on, you know, kind of the before and after, but the length of time between the before and after can sometimes be years and years and years. So that's how I got started. But and then the other thing that's been an influence on me is Edward Hopper, the painter. And I like the flat perspective for the most part. These are flat, again, because it emphasizes the geometric. I look for the abstract qualities of a swath of color, and then something unexpected maybe that's in the photograph. So there's really, for me, a lot going on in these. So that's it.
Yeah, and actually hearing you talk about that, it made me very aware of the that the geometry of the photographs and the subject matter, I think are really, or maybe I should say the subject matter helps to enhance the content because there's so little nature in them. You know, there's such a strong sense of geometry because it's all basically cement and brick, or, you know, whatever the building materials are, or, you know, this intense color that's from some of the signage. But there's very little in terms of organic line and shape in these, which I think kind of adds to that sense of the dehumanization that's, you know.
Well,
Mhm.
I just wanted to say too, now that you bring that up, the other way I got into this subject matter is my husband and I like to hike a lot. And in the course of hiking in the Arizona desert, we'd have this wilderness and suddenly come upon a dumpster with nothing else around it. And it was such an interruption in our enjoyment of nature that I started taking pictures out there of those kinds of things. And I realized that my progression was nature with the man-made element, but then I got closer and closer and still consider the geometric landscapes, but because of the man-made influence, you can't see the natural landscape. And so that was my progression.
I'd also add, if I can jump in, I think one thing that that came into my mind when Linda was speaking is that I think the abandonment, and I don't mean to put words in her mouth, but I think the abandonment really draws attention to the form in these architectural settings because the use isn't there. Those things are not, they don't show signs of current usage. And so you're kind of left looking at the remnant, you know, at just the sort of physical husk. And I think that throws emphasis onto form of things that we might not pay as much attention to the form of if they were still in the kind of use that they once had.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
true.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Linda, did you want to say something, or?
No, I
Okay.
was just agreeing with Monte. It was a good point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there was something really interesting that that both Monte and Linda were saying, but what struck me about what Linda was saying is the idea that she's drawn to the form and the formal qualities first, and then kind of figured out what why she was drawn to why she was drawn to those beyond the formal qualities. Because I also am teaching a senior seminar at the moment, and we were just talking about this as part of our artist statement workshop, because you don't always know exactly what it is that you're doing or why you're drawn to something. I'm also not going to sit down and spend time with something that I'm not drawn to the formal qualities of. Like, the geometry is usually what pulls me in, and the shapes. And then I kind of, as I'm sitting with the drawing, then I realize like what it is that I'm thinking about as I'm doing the pieces.
Yeah, and it's really important that I think all three of you kind of, you know, mention that to my seniors, because one thing is a lot of them, although maybe less so in this class, these students seem to know, a lot of them know what they want to do, but usually a lot of them don't know what they want to do. And first of all, that's okay. You know, it's okay to not know what you're doing, as long as you keep doing something, as long as you're working. And I think it's so interesting that in work that maybe, I don't know, I kind of want to say on the surface, it seems one way more than the other, but it actually seems both. Like, I could see where one could think, oh, this is very formal work, but on the other hand, one could think, well, there's a lot of content to this work. But that even when it seems that there's a lot of content, that the content is actually secondary to either the formal engagement that the artist has with the subject, or, you know, if it's maybe something that's more materially based. And I think it's really interesting to hear that from three artists whose work maybe seems like, there's a lot of content to it. You've got some drawings here.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm also very process oriented. Like one of the things that keeps me interested in what I'm doing is kind of building in accidents and building in some unexpected elements that I can't control. But I thought it might be interesting to see where I start, because I actually go to sites that are in the process of rebuilding after some kind of natural or man-made disaster. And I usually am sitting in like a pile of rubble, sitting and drawing whatever it is that I'm interested in. And then those come back to the studio with me to make the paintings, because the paintings are encaustic, which is wax. I can't bring my pancake griddle, which is what I use as a palette, out into the landscape. So instead I'm doing the plein air drawings, and these are fairly detailed, and then I abstract somewhat from those. And I brought a few that, or a couple that can just be passed, because these ones, some of them go up and become framed and go into shows, but these ones were ones that I used as source materials. But as long as your hands are fairly clean, you're welcome to pass them. And they've been modified. Like these are two that are actually related to pieces that are in the show. And you'll see that there are things that change as I go. And I also don't bother to do any color notes as I go, because I like inventing the color just based on what feels right for that particular scene.
And do you work exclusively from sketches, or do you reference photographs?
I try to work exclusively from sketches. There have been some times where it's either not safe or possible to be in a space that I would really like to work from. And I have done a few photographs, but I find there's something about spending time in the space directly first, and then distancing myself from it by taking those sketches back to the studio to see how they translate. And I haven't felt as connected when I try to work from photographs.
And how do you choose a site?
Often it's someplace I want to travel and then figure out how to write a grant to get to that space, and then go and map out. It's like the research is actually really interesting to me to figure out like what possibilities exist in a particular place. And sometimes you can't predict like what you're going to find when you actually are there. Especially because often if you're writing a grant, it's like 2 or 3 years before you actually get to the space.
Right.
Yeah, it's often someplace that I want to go anyway.
And how do you make the color decisions? You said whatever feels right. And I ask because, I'm looking at Blue Hollow, is that what's called?
Yeah.
There's such a, a strong analogous, blue-green kind of palette. And then there's the other one. Is that the same building, the green and gold?
Yeah, and those are the two drawings that are going around. Those are two different views of a cathedral in Christchurch, New Zealand, that was mostly destroyed by an earthquake in, I'm going to forget the date. I want to say 2007. But they've been rebuilding it. The colors, I generally do that decision making as I'm sorting out collage. So I'm a painter, like I started out as an oil painter, but as I moved into doing the encaustic and collage, it sort of like separates out the steps of the process. So I just pull colors, and I have rules that I set for myself because it helps set limits where I don't have endless choices. So for instance, I'll be like, this one is only going to come from a single magazine, and that magazine has to be architectural. Or this one's going to be only out of a cooking magazine. And then I try to choose the palette based on what I have available. And if I run out of a color, I have to figure out something else.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah, when I painted abstractly, that was one of the hardest things, just to make those color choices. Like when there's nothing that's determining what color anything has to be, it just seems infinite, and like there's just so many possibilities. It sounds like
I just base it on value. So I base it on value, and then what colors, like as I pull the palette, that's mostly just sort of instinct.
Yeah, and as I said to you before, the color it glows, and I know that
I've never seen them this well lit.
Oh.
My studio is a little bit dark these days, so I'm really excited to see all the light on them.
She is Savannah and Joelle.
Oh, thank you.
Did the lighting. the first time too. Yeah, they really glow. And that's also, even though you say they've never been lit this well, that's also partly a product of it being encaustic, right?
Yeah. So, and if, for those of you not familiar with encaustic, it's molten wax. So when I started doing collage, I was an oil painter at that point, and I was just doing the collage as studies, but you can't put collage and oil paint together because the paper will decay. Or you can, but you need somebody really dedicated to conserving what you've done. So encaustic was a way for me to mix those two things together.
Right, right. So Monte, you know, I've met Monte like 2
A
decades.
while ago.
A while
Mhm.
ago, when he was so kind as to put me in a show when I was working with wax. But I hadn't seen your work till I guess I started following you on social media, and I was just, you know, it's amazing to me the amount of drawing that you do and the dedication to the sketchbook and the process of just, you know, just drawing constantly. And he was very generous, not only to lend us 3 of his sketchbooks, but to come up with this kind of
I don't know what
device.
to call them either.
Well, you called them sketchbook traps, which is a very
Yeah.
good way to describe it. Devices that allow the sketchbook to be here and you to leaf through them without it, you know, possibly being taken away. They're stuck to the pedestal for now. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. And I put little pairs of cotton gloves on the pedestals so that you won't be touching the paper with your hands. But I really want people to know that they can, and I want people to actually flip through these, because that's the point of their being here, to be looked at, and so that you have the experience of actually looking through an artist's sketchbook to see what, you know, at least this particular artist does. And it's amazing to me how, Monte, how you're able to, you know, bring so many different mediums to the sketchbook, you know, that you bring acrylic painting to it, and writing and drawing and pen. And actually, I want to ask you, do you ever work in graphite, or do you always work in pen?
I have to admit, I pretty much just go straight to pen.
Yeah.
And I kind of always have. I think that's partly an architectural drawing convention, architectural sketching. Not that every architect who sketches does it that way, but I think at the time that I started doing it, you draw in pen if you're doing conceptual architectural sketching, so that you commit to things, so that you commit to the thing you're making. And so I tend to just go for it and start right in with ink.
Yeah, and the way you phrased that was something like, you know, I have to admit, like, it's a bad thing. To me, it's, you know, it's so impressive. And I think it's really good for my students to hear, you know, you talk about committing to something, you know, committing to the line that you're putting down, committing to the mark that you're putting down, and the kind of fearlessness that is required to do something like that. And
Yeah.
and also in a sketchbook, I find that I don't know, just like the sheer number of ideas that you have to go through, and to be able to fill up a sketchbook, let alone sketchbook after sketchbook after
Yeah.
sketchbook. You know, you have to be fearless, not only with the mark making and the material, but also with the ideas, you know, that you're just kind of unfiltered. You know, you're putting down unfiltered whatever, you know, whatever's
Yeah.
coming to mind.
Yeah. I make a point of kind of not editing what goes into them. So it will be conceptual ideas or drawings of someone, you know, in a bar that I'm in, or something that I've specifically sought out to draw. And it's really, I like the sketchbooks as a record of a broad range of interests, of things that catch my eye in the course of daily life. And for me, one of the best aspects of the sketchbooks is that I look back at past sketchbooks, and because it's every component of my life, it gets represented in there. They really take me back to where I was, who I was at that time, in a way that I think if they were more deliberately selected subjects, it maybe wouldn't work that way for me. But really, they're just a map of my daily consciousness.
So just out of curiosity and to give everybody, especially my students, an idea of how much you draw and how quickly you draw, how long does it take you to go through a sketchbook?
If I'm in good form, about 6 weeks for one of those books, and I really just kind of start with the next one and keep at it. So 4 to 6 weeks if I'm really on, and everything else in my life is kind of giving me enough time to put some of that in. So right now my teaching schedule is a little bit hectic, but I'm still drawing a lot. So I'm actually on a pretty good pace. But at most, for the last 10 years or so, maybe 3 months to fill one, but it tends to be more toward 4 to 6 weeks.
And do you draw every day?
I attempt to, yeah. I wouldn't say every day, but when I do miss a day, I kind of make a point to double down and not do that again right away.
Linda, is there anything that you want to share about your process? I mean, it's, we kind of touched on it in terms of, the formal elements of the, the scene being the thing that really, motivates you to take the pictures. Are there any other kinds of decisions that are really important to your process?
Well, actually, how they're displayed in a gallery on a wall. I decided a long time ago that the size that you see there is how I wanted them to be displayed. And then it was also limited by the size of the printer I could afford. So, practical considerations. But I always felt this size was just perfect for what I wanted to convey, and that it holds the wall, and then I'm happy with that. The other thing I was thinking about when Margaret was talking about the different places she's been to do her work, it brings me back to, it's not part of the process, but because these are abandoned buildings, they're sometimes not in very safe neighborhoods. And so part of my process was learning how to take better care and be more aware of my surroundings. There was one time in Elizabeth, New Jersey, an abandoned building, and I was pulled toward the architecture and the graffiti on it. And so I'm there in the middle of this field photographing, and suddenly this guy comes up behind me, and it turns out he was an undercover cop, and he said, "Get out of here. There are people in that building that they were staking it out." And then he disappeared. It was like, oh my God, And so I got out of there very quickly, but sometimes I take photographs at night. I have to be careful. So there's all those practical considerations of where you're taking pictures. And I have to give my husband a lot of credit because he's been my assistant and watching my back in some of these locations where it just doesn't make sense to, go in alone. I don't know what the other two artists, if they ever had to think where they are about who's around. And another interesting thing, because of that, I became much more attuned to nature and the sounds of what was going around, on around me. And I really enjoyed that part of the process. But you have to be on your toes. So
Yeah,
It's
I would
inter-
agree with that too. I think with sketching, and it sounds like Margaret as well with drawing on site. There is that awareness that comes, especially if you're getting into sites that have degradation and abandonment. Your awareness of your surroundings, to me, that just dovetails with awareness of the subject matter, and the two kind of become. For me, that's one of the joys of sketching, is that I feel very present in the place where I am sketching in a way that when I just bike through a neighborhood or walk through a neighborhood, I pay a lot of attention, but when I'm drawing, I'm just very connected to all of it, partly because of what Linda's saying, that I'm aware that I'm in some sketchy places and I'm on my little camping stool and very immersed in my drawing, but I need to be constantly aware of my surroundings. And I think that shows in the work of for all three bodies of work here.
Yeah, I'll add to that I really like listening to music when I work, and I do not do that when I'm
Yeah.
out sketching in the landscape. I try to stay aware of what's around me. And I also kind of like the fact with plein air painting is that you're capturing a very finite moment that's fleeting, and the weather might change, the light might change, it might start raining. And you might have to leave because you might not feel safe. So I definitely like this one did not ever get finished. And I kind of like that I don't have that I'm just given the amount of time that I'm there, and I have the information that I can collect in the time that I'm there. So it's like one of the other parameters that I have on my work.
So was that made on location, or was that
Yeah,
in the
this
studio?
one
Wow.
was, yeah.
Yeah, I love the parts. Well,
Yeah.
I love that there are parts that are not finished. It creates this amazing light. Yeah, you get very involved in a drawing on location. That's a lot of mark making for doing it out there,
I'm
on the
also
spot.
I love pen. I don't like sketching anything out to start.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm like Monte, I don't mind having some mistakes in there. I just kind of go.
And there's so much fine line in there and overlapping. It's like that negative space that
Your hand builds up a good amount of endurance after you've been doing it for a few days. Yeah.
Is there anything else anybody wants to add before we take questions?
I guess I would just mention one thing that connects, in my case, the paintings to the sketchbook, is that the three sketchbooks that are there actually have the preliminary drawings for the paintings that I have in the show. And that was an intentional choice for me in selecting which sketchbooks to include, because I think it is I would really like if Margaret would hold that drawing she just held up, like right up to the camera at some point here, because it looked great, but I'm not seeing it really clearly. But I think seeing the paintings that result from the sketches, I think seeing the preliminary sketches for the paintings that I have really gives them a depth, and I think it's interesting to see how I got from the one to the other.
I actually have a question, Monte. How do you feel about painting? Because, when I look at your paintings, I love them, but they feel much more, formal and finished than your sketchbooks do. And so
I wish I painted more, because I would love for the paintings to get the same kind of immediacy and abandon that the sketchbook drawings have. I think I tighten up when I paint. It's just always been the case, and I haven't had a sustained painting practice in order to develop that. So it's something that I would love to do one of these days when I'm not doing 100 other things that prevent me really painting, in a sustained manner.
And it is a different medium, to be fair.
Yes.
It's a very different kind of process. And certainly when I look at, is it drive-in photo? Is that what it's called? The
Oh
one-
yeah, right. The little photo booth.
Yeah. That's got that splash of paint in there, and the edges that are unfinished. And even though that, the photo booth and the car are much more carefully painted, and I love that contrast between the more open, unfinished raw parts of the painting, and then, the more kind of focus, detailed part of that.
Yeah, that was me deliberately trying to develop that. That painting is, I think, probably the newest of those,
Okay.
and I was specifically trying to really loosen up and start exploring that more, because it happens very naturally for me in the sketchbooks, because I draw in them every day, and painting is something that I do when I'm able to carve out some time, and I think that, yeah, that painting shows me actually trying to grapple with that.
And actually, I have one more question, then I'm going to open it up to questions. But I know you specifically say, when you list the medium for the work, that the paintings are done on salvaged wood, I believe is the phrase
Yeah.
you use. So is that conceptually intentional, that it relates to the images themselves, or is that just kind of how you find your surfaces?
I think it's all sort of just part of my own demeanor. I love to make things and to scavenge. And to my mind, if I can, I prefer painting on plywood panels to painting on stretched canvas. And I am decent enough at making stuff that if I can find scraps of plywood and, stretcher bars or pieces of wood that I can use to build up the panel myself, I'd rather do that than go to Blick or whatever and buy pre-made panels. And it has odd results. They're never a consistent size. A lot of times it will really be because I happened to find a piece of board that was an interesting size or proportion, and it just springs from that. So it's partly just me. I haven't tried to make paintings that are consistent in size or format. And maybe if I were painting more, I would want to regularize that, but I kind of doubt it.
Okay, so questions, anybody?
Message you like to convey in your structured drawings and illustrations? Like, are you showing a message? Like, are you telling us a narrative?
In the drawings themselves, I mean,
Like,
I think of these as just being studies for the paintings. But I mean, they are also their own pieces, but they do tie back to the idea of communities relying on infrastructure that's ultimately somewhat fragile and aging, and that sometimes that infrastructure that we're relying on doesn't stand up to seismic, like, earthquakes or floods or other events that happen. So like just sort of the fragility of what we're relying on a day-to-day basis.
Joel?
so I think you mentioned that before. Let's see.
Huh. You mean, does it influence the choices that I make there? I mean, it does in terms of like when I don't finish the drawing, then there often are sort of things that I either have to invent or leave more simplified, which I really like. Whether I wouldn't say necessarily influences me, like I did do a drawing once, like huddled underneath an umbrella, which does not make a very good shelter, but like I actually had the foresight to bring an umbrella with me that day, which is unusual. And I've done a lot of drawings from the car. So a car makes an excellent portable studio. So I went to my dad grew up in Montana, but partially in Butte, Montana. So some of this series started with drawings done in Butte. And I hadn't anticipated that in Butte, in June, it's not actually really summer. So it snowed when I was there doing drawings at the time that I had planned. So I did most of the drawings from inside the rental car for that trip. You have to adjust.
Symmetrical and mathematical in the full sense, but it's like that in your collage work. Like, how do you reflect upon that?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we often are trained to think like you go bigger to smaller, like you take bigger shapes and you make them finer details in the upper layers. But for me, I feel like I have to get this out. Like I want to get the detail out in the drawings and it's done. And I then can do whatever I want with the paintings. It frees me up to be more general, more abstracted, you know, like, and simplify the shapes and kind of break them down to what makes them universal rather than necessarily quite as specific as the drawings are.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me feel like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. It's too much putting these shows together. Anyway,
Thank
whatever.
you for all, it's beautiful.
Who's next? Kim. It's catching.
Working on site, do you think your process of how you work changes based on the amount of other people in the space? Like, does it says there being other people nearby into how you're taking?
Does one of you want to start with that?
Is it for everybody? Oh,
I'm afraid that one of you would have to rephrase or restate the question because I'm not hearing I can't hear
Yeah, I should probably-
anyone's questions, I'm afraid.
My question was, do you think the way you create changes if there's other people in the public space you're working in?
For myself, I would say no, because I draw so I just do, and I don't concern myself with I carry a little camping stool around with me all the time, and I would sit down on a New York City sidewalk, just unfold the stool and park myself, people milling all around. I will draw in a bar, I will draw in an abandoned lot or with people all around. So I think it changes it probably changes the feeling of the drawing in a lot of ways, from what kind of aspects of the subject I look at, but also even things like the quality of line or how long I spend on the whole drawing. If there are people around, maybe I finish more quickly. So I think it has an effect on the result, but I don't think about it. I just do.
Well, for me, I tend to prefer that no people are around. But when they do come up, they're just very inquisitive and what am I doing? And especially now with, I use a tripod and a bigger camera. And when people see that, it's so different from, their iPhones. And so there are a lot of questions, and they're usually pretty friendly. Or if somebody, for instance, I'm now remembering with the Carvel, Noel for a long time, and I went several days. I like to go back to a place and photograph several times, different light. And then one time I was there, and then suddenly this guy comes up and says, "What are you doing?" And it turns out that, and unbeknownst to me, the landowner next to the Carvel was charged with watching the property. And so I really had to convince him that I was an innocent, you know, I mean, I just did the whole thing. Oh, I'm an artist. Here's my card, that whole thing. But, and then he was fine with it. And I actually went back again and he said, oh, great. I'm happy you're here. But in terms of what I'm looking for when I'm photographing or anything like that, I really do prefer to be alone, and that I feel that the whole environment is my studio. And so I enjoy the solitude if I can get it. It's too distracting with other people.
I mean, I think if you look at all of them, what's distinctive is, I think it was Linda that mentioned that there aren't really natural elements in most of the scenes, and there also aren't people. And I think if you think about what it would feel like if there was a figure in any of them, there's nothing wrong with that idea, but they would be very different paintings. It'd be much harder to place yourself in those scenes as the viewer. Like, I think like you're able to kind of enter the scenes because there's nobody in them in a different way.
Yeah, I took note when I was thinking about that earlier, and just that the photograph of the Texaco station with the chair that's knocked over, or you know, the graffiti in one of Monte's paintings. It's the only evidence of humans ever, you know, being in these places, and that almost creates more of a sense of desolation, like, you know, what happened to these people. I know what I was going to say, which was that it's like, I was thinking, looking at that painting and your drawing, like you're really getting to know the place through the drawing. And then once you know that place really intimately, you can then kind of either abstract it or, you know, kind of be more expressive with it.
Yeah. But I do seem to be incapable of doing the abstraction in this stage. So
do you think that's because of the medium, or?
I don't know. I did once set out to do a drawing from the car as my husband and I drove from Pennsylvania to Montana. And I was like, this is going to be super loose and abstract. Like, you know, like I'm in awe that Monte is able to do that. And it turned out to be incredibly tight. Like, it was a 34-foot drawing of very specific snippets of the scenery along the way that I would just sort of retain in my brain and like draw really quickly. But it was not loose. I just don't seem to be able to do that in drawing.
It's funny. I was actually, I was showing my husband some of Monte's drawings the other night. And my husband draws a lot in sketchbooks, and he's a real fan of drawing and comic books. And oh my God, I go again. I was saying something about there's something about the looseness. I don't know what's going on with the paint at night. I think there's like so much for me to think about with all of this and keeping my thoughts organized. I'm having a very hard time. Okay, we'll move on. Anybody have any more questions? Yes, Jennifer.
I was just talking to Suzanne about this before, because all of the stuff that made me fall in love with painting is not what I'm doing now. Like, I love the spontaneity of oil paint and like the butteriness of it and being able to apply it really loosely. And right now I'm like piecing together tiny pieces of collage, like a puzzle onto the encaustic, and then it's very precise. But I love the color, I love the surface. So it's the end product that keeps me interested in it. And I do love parts of the process, but I definitely have taken the spontaneity out of it for myself. And what took me from, there were two things that took me from oil to encaustic. One was that I felt like I was falling into kind of lazy habits with oil. Like, if I wanted to mix a color, I sort of knew exactly how to do it. And I would just sort of rely on that. And so this really gets me on my toes. I've been doing it now for about 20 years. So I have been doing it for a while, but I still don't feel as comfortable with it as I did with oil paint. I can't control it, and I like that battle. And then the other part was wanting to mix the collage elements and having that sort of micro and macro, like having small patterns that you can see up close and and then also from a distance. And the collage wouldn't mix well with the oil. So that's the other reason that I started doing it that way. Yeah. I mean, when I look at other people's paintings, I often respond to edge quality, surface, and color. And those are the things that I'm able to achieve with this mix. And I also have always loved like Byzantine enamels. And like this is as close as I can get on a large scale to doing that.
What made you like want to switch from oil to not the wax, but the collage? And when you did do that, did you receive from viewers like more criticism or praise? It's like sometimes a little bit tougher to go into the collage.
I mean, every time I've changed, people are always like, why would you do that? Because you're good at that other thing, you know? And like, I think that's such a crazy question as artists, like, you want to keep pushing into the things that you're bad at, you know, like, and it did take a while for me to get any kind of control over it. But if you don't do that, then your work doesn't grow. But yeah, I did get pushback when I started switching, and I kind of like dodged that by being like, well, these are just studies, you know, for the other thing that's my real work. The collage was a way of, I had mentioned that I was getting very like habitual with the paint. And then also I just felt like I couldn't get the colors I wanted with the paint. The collage was a way of like keeping the purity of the colors. So, and then from there, I then wanted to keep the collage, but have it also be painting. So that's when I shifted into the encaustic.
How does the collage help to maintain the purity of the color? I'm just curious about what that.
I don't know. I mean, I just feel like the colors that I'm achieving, I would have a very hard time achieving with oil paint without doing a lot of glazing. And I'm not a patient person.
Is that because it's encaustic though, or is that because of the collage?
I think it's the
specifically?
layer, like you're getting a glaze effect from the collage underneath and then the encaustic on top. So it's giving, it's like a shorthand for glazing, which I don't have the patience to like wait for something to
Right.
dry and then do another glaze layer and then wait for that to dry. So.
And how did you get to that? Like when you were oil painting, when you were, you know, working in oil, how did you start? Because it didn't go straight from oil to encaustic, right? There was a collage thing
In
that you wanted to
between?
do. Yeah.
I started the collage in grad school because my mentor, an amazing painter named Charles Cajori, suggested that I try it because he was seeing that I was having these problems with color.
Oh, wow.
And so that was just sort of like a one-off, and then I kept doing it in grad school, but I didn't, like the encaustic had been something I had seen in college, somebody doing, but then had been told, oh no, people blow up their studios doing encaustic, like you can't.
Right.
And so like, there's all of this like mystique and like fear, but then I did the research and like, was like, well, it can spontaneously combust. You do not want to do it without taking measures to protect yourself. But if you ventilate properly, it, you know, like it's totally, and regulate your temperatures, it's totally safe. So, you know, it's actually safer than some of the solvents that you're using with oil paint. So that was kind of like, once I was able to establish my own studio and have it set up to do encaustic, that's when I moved into that. But I've always loved materials and experimentation, so.
Yeah, and I think, you know, related to what Sonja was saying about, you know, just asking about the collage. And I think it's also kind of related to what Jennifer was saying. The collage, I mean, looking at that particular painting from here anyway, the collage creates, as you were referencing, edges, you know, these particular kinds of edges and patches that feel very much like it makes the painting feel like it's being built rather than painted.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's what the process feels like. It
Yeah.
feels like building something or constructing something.
And you sketch like blueprint.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
So Monte, I've noticed that your theme is like painting cars, and I had a similar thing back in high school where I
Mhm.
wanted to like give these old rustic cars like a new like life meaning to it with like beauty through my paintings in high school. And one
Sure.
of the paintings that I saw is that one of the cars is upside down, and I was wondering if there's like a message to that.
I was hoping that that would come up. I will be honest, that happened because I accidentally drew that car upside down in my sketchbook. I had the sketchbook turned around, and I didn't realize it until I had finished that sketch. And when I looked back, I thought that there was something really interesting about it. And that was also when I began to, that was done, that's actually in my neighborhood here. And it was a time when I was beginning to think about the context that the cars were in. And in this case, I thought, well, this is great. I will paint the house that this car is sitting in front of or in the driveway of, but I'm going to keep it upside down. And it was an absolute, accidental discovery. And I just said, the idea popped into my head, so I went through with it. And I that kind of set off a series of of studies where I was putting these cars into unusual configurations. And I haven't really pushed it farther, but it's still kind of there in my head as one potential direction to take. But that one was definitely just it amused me when the thought cropped into my head that, well, you drew it upside down. Maybe that's just what it is. And the title of that one is Inverted Belvedere because it's a Plymouth Belvedere, but the idea of a belvedere being an elevated place that you look from. It's a belvedere is sort of a beautiful view, I think, is probably what belvedere means etymologically. And I liked the idea of an inversion of that, and it plays on the name of the car, but also just as a way of just running with it and just kind of letting the subject matter tell me things and then playing with those.
That's interesting. At first, I thought that maybe you did your paintings plein air, and my first thought was that the car was upside down in person. So yeah.
No, one of the things that I would love to do one of these days is just go to salvage yards. I haven't located a good one around here, but I would love to find some situations where that is the case, where the cars are, stacked up on each other, or they're the remainder after everything usable has been stripped from the car and they just kind of toss it in a corner. And certainly crashed cars are another thing that show up a lot as subject matter when I have the opportunity, partly because of that. There's an abstraction or a formal change that happens, and you get to record, you get to hint at the original beautiful, sculptural quality of the car, but it's gotten all of these new sculptural qualities by its state, especially when it's been completely, wrecked and or mangled. So it is definitely something that I'm on the lookout for. But generally, when I find cars in the wild, they are right side up, and so that was just that was a fun. That was an exciting discovery for me, but it did put me in mind of that oh, these cars become more interesting if I can do something different with them, or if they are already in a state that takes them even farther away from what that car used to signify.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do any of you have particular commissions that you satisfy?
No.
I do some occasionally, but it doesn't happen all that often. I actually had a fantasy when I left New York that I might one of these days like to live in a van and just roam the country going to like car shows, and just thinking that that could be a good thing to do for a while, is just uh, just take commissions kind of on the fly as an itinerant artist. But circumstances led me to make different choices, and now I'm kind of exploring this current career path a little while, but so that would be my answer. And for the most part, now I'm teaching full time all of a sudden, and I pretty much reached out to not only anybody who was asking me to do a commission, but even my visualization freelance clients in New York. I basically had to contact them all and take myself off the market. So commissions, I generally am much happier making art for myself. I find commissions, I get so concerned, partly because of the architectural background. You know, you're there to serve your client. And I think when I do commissions, that mindset is in my head. And I think that makes it less satisfying for me as an artist than the work that I make for myself.
Well, I totally agree with what you were saying. And for me, the few commissions that I've been asked to do, I find that the person asking has their own vision of what something should look like. And inevitably, it's not mine. And so it's very hard to satisfy someone, even, and this is not quite that, but someone bought an empty storefront from me, and I had it framed in these white frames, and she wanted me to send it down to North Carolina or somewhere where she was. And then I said, oh, when you get a chance, please send me a photograph of where you installed it. I'd just like to see it. And so she was happy enough to accommodate me. Lo and behold, she got rid of my $400 frame and put a very traditional brown wood frame on it. And, you know, I mean, I was happy to sell it to her, don't get me wrong, but and it looked good. It looked good. But so I just think that people have to, they see a work of art, they like it, and they want it as it is, in my opinion. And because you just can't satisfy another person's aesthetic taste. It's pretty tough.
Yeah, I'm totally with the two of you as well. And I mean, I feel like I have the luxury of having a job that pays my bills. And so I don't do commissions, and there's nothing wrong with doing commissions. I have a lot of students that will do them. But for me, I agree, like their vision is not usually what my vision is. And my time feels so precious in the studio because I have a full-time job that I want to make the work that I want to make in that time.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you so much for organizing this exhibit.
Yes, thanks very much, Suzanne.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Yeah, I feel really, really grateful and lucky to have worked with all of you. Because there's a lot of people come in and get to enjoy it. All right, so please feel free to hang around. I don't think Monte and Linda are going to get to mingle, but Margaret,
I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
Goodbye.
All right. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you. That was a great observation. Like that it was broader, more abstract.
Yeah, I like it. I feel like you like that looser more. And you have more enjoyment, even though it's such a longer process.
Oh, it's such,
A lot more effort, but that's apparently it was